If you want to move water a kilometre, you'll have to raise it at least 50 metres. If you want a large amount of water to flow a long distance, you will in fact be lifting that very heavy substance to a very great height. In practice, it's not usually very practical to move water from one catchment to another. One of the problems many of our cities have is that they've grown and grown and grown, and they are outgrowing their water catchments. We recently saw something about the huge cost of water restrictions. It wasn't really counting the cost of all the hours people spend hand hosing and so on. Food is another thing that people need, of course, and as you know, for the first time it is clear that the world is in a bit of trouble food-wise. Humans need absorption of their garbage, their sewage, their greenhouse gases, their nuclear and other poisons if they're going to use nuclear energy, and their waste ores, which often get pushed down a river as is happening in New Guinea. And as you know, catastrophe is pending there on the greenhouse gas area. There's also the issue of energy. You presumably know about peak oil, the fact that the world is peaking here, and the oil is going to get more and more expensive. It took about a year to go from the unimaginable height of $50 a barrel to now where it is at around 100. People also need export earnings. All the things you buy, basically your country has to sell other things. For instance, a lot of people think Australia grows a lot of wheat, but a lot of that wheat has to be sold back to buy the fertiliser with which you grow the wheat. And what is fertiliser? Basically oil. Not only does it incorporate the energy of oil, which is why terrorists can use nitrate fertilisers in bombs. They're almost as concentrated as oil or petrol. They're actually made out of the oil or petrol. And farmers pour it on their land like water. And native economists say, well, the Green Revolution was wonderful. All we need is fertiliser. Fertiliser too is turning expensive and scarce. Urban space, oddly, is another major issue. It has very little to do with the size of the country. It's to do with the size of the cities and how near the centre of them you want to live. Australians don't found new cities anymore. Time was when they did, and if someone found gold at Bendigo or Ballarat, within a week there'd be a tent city. If the gold kept coming for a few months or years, it would turn into a permanent city. But nowadays everyone wants to be close to one of the major cities, and people are paying through the nose for positions anywhere near the centre. It's not really the cost of building houses, it's the cost of housing land, which is forced up and up by population. And many people make a very tidy profit out of that fact. Another thing we need is our rights and responsibilities to other species. You can see the major problem in south of Brisbane, where they're pouring 1,000 people a month into Brisbane, as they are into Melbourne and Sydney. Brisbane is expanding southward into prime rainforests to the south of Brisbane. Rainforests turned into shopping centres and Woolworths overnight. And recently the Queensland Premier said, we're getting this out of balance. We need more room for people. Of course she needs more room for people. She's pushing more people in. And if you periodically rebalance, eventually nature will lose out heavily. Finally, we need space for the human spirit. And on that I'll leave you to chase up on the internet that wonderful book, Wilderness and the American Mind by Roderick Nash, which charts the whole pursuit of the importance of having some space that is not human-raised. And that's a vast story in the USA alone. The Australian Academy of Science, as far back as 1994, before anyone was talking very much about greenhouse and when peak oil was just a vague rumour, brought down a detailed report saying that we should not exceed 23 million people in Australia. It really wanted to say 19, but the government already had the bit between its teeth. Today, if you did such a report, and you couldn't because you wouldn't get the cooperation, for instance, from the ANU Demography Department that they had back then, it had a very different personnel in it then, and people very much more concerned about environment. If it were done today, that report would have to be far stronger on the limits to growth in Australia. So looking at all those factors, you might well ask, which is the limiting factor? Or is it rather a mix of them all? I leave you with a quotation from Barry Jones's 1994 report, in which he said, we've received numerous suggestions and very different attitudes as to how increasing population might damage the environment in Australia. We have received almost none as to how it might benefit it. We move on to the next sheet. Why is Australia's carrying capacity limited? Aren't we a big country with boundless plains to share? Professor Jeffrey Hope, Professor of Archaeology and Natural History, often takes his students out into that country back of Burke. There's almost no cities, no water, no possibility of human life. And it says in his dry way, have a look there, folks. Those are the boundless plains to share. The myth that because Australia looks bigger on the map, it must be big in carrying capacity, has always been exploded by more serious studies. Barry Jones's report in 1994 pulled out the fertile areas and duplicated them as if they were islands lying off the coast to give us a better idea. The website of Sustainable Population Australia will give you far more detail on this. I get a bit bored with repeating the obvious points. It should be obvious. Australia is very largely infertile. If you draw a map of the fertile soils of Australia, they're relatively minuscule because we haven't had volcanic activity. It's a stable plate. Draw a map of the areas with regular and reliable rainfall. They're quite small too. Superimpose the two to find the areas that are like the Ukraine, where you have both deep, fertile soils and regular and reliable rainfall, and they are minuscule. That's why Australia is a small country in terms of its agricultural productivity. We grow in a good year far less wheat than France. In a bad year, we grow less wheat than Britain. And by Britain, I mean Sussex. So it's patriotic nonsense that this is a vast country full of resources. What it does have is its share of mineral resources, but it was the policy of the Howard government to dig them up and sell them off as fast as possible. And there's plenty of evidence that the Rudd government will be no better in that. When you sell off resources, you actually lose them. It shows as a wonderful thing in the balance sheet that so much money was earned, but that resource is not there to be sold again. The next sheet, I think.
So we lost a bit of that in the photocopy.
Because all this material is up on the Sustainable Population Australia website and is easily found, it has repeatedly been duplicated in studies by CSIRO, Academy of Science and others. I don't think we really need to go into it in detail, but it's there. It's the next sheet. We've got some of the basics there. I think, again, I'm sorry, I've only just produced these sheets, but I will send them in electronic form so that Richard can distribute them to you. A little bit of poetry. A.D. Hope, the father of Professor Hope I just mentioned, has a poem called Australia that puts it in memorable words. Australia, they call her a young country, but they lie. She is the last of lands, the oldest, a woman beyond the change of life, etc. Very memorable and famous words. Yet that myth of the rich empty country is actually written into our national anthem. The Optimum Population Society in Britain estimated that Australia's long-term carrying capacity for humans was about 10 million at current standards of affluence, or about 20 million if we could learn to pull in our horns and adapt, something that the government is just tentatively putting one toe in the water about as yet. But, not with any great courage. Tim Flannery, I think, put up 13 million as the long-term sustainable human population of Australia. So we come to the dauntless question: do more humans mean more impact on the environment? Do pigs eat acorns? Do dogs eat bones? Or as the Americans say, do bears shit in the woods? A simple way of putting it, population size matters because basic per capita needs are the hardest of all to reduce. If people are living like millionaires and taking space tours that use vast amounts of fuel, perhaps you can shame them out of that. But if people are just numerous and living on the smell of an oily rag, how can you deny them resources? That's why population is such an important issue to face. Next. Pronatalism. Peter mentioned pronatalist philosophies. Pronatalism basically means the fear of population decline, the belief that having more babies is good. It's a deep and instinctive belief, I think, hardwired into the human race. In one of my poems about those remote areas Richard was talking about, where humans